a history of sweeping things under the rug. Whenever you're looking at decades and decades and decades, we have had studies that have shown that synthetic dyes can cause issues with inattentiveness, sleeplessness, irritability, and aggression. And, there's literally 27 clinical trials just looking at that on children. There's also animalistic evidence and in vitro evidence. And so there's a slew of studies. And, when you put those together, that's a very, very strong evidence.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take some time to tell you about an underutilized resource that I have, and the people who do utilize it come back and tell us how pivotal it was in their birth experience because, well, it helps them push for literally under 30 minutes with their first time baby. Yeah, I'm talking about my Secret Sauce to Pushing course. It is a course that teaches you not only how to engage the appropriate muscles to push out your baby, and you know what, that is not your pelvic floor. She actually needs to yield and get out of the way for your baby to be able to pass through your vagina. We're talking about engaging muscles in the upper part of your abdominal cavity. It's called your fundal muscle or your fundus, and I'm going to teach you exactly how to locate it, how to engage it, and how to use it properly to be able to push for less than 30 minutes. I know that sounds like a pipe dream, but you can head to our Instagram and there are highlights on there of women who use the Secret Sauce to Pushing and were absolutely blown away by the results. When you know how to properly push because you're using the right anatomical parts of your body to push your baby out, all works well. Where we run into problems is when you push like you're taking a poop. Well, your poop is coming out of your anal cavity, which is similar to your vaginal canal, but very different. Your anal cavity actually works to push out your feces by something called peristalsis, which is this incremental rhythmic contraction that pushes out your poop. Well, your vaginal canal does this with your uterine muscles during labor, but your fetal ejection reflex, hint, hint, reflex, it's instinctual. You don't actually have to activate anything, is what pushes out your baby. You're not going to want to push from your pelvic floor because your baby is above that. So if you're engaging the muscles that are below your baby to push your baby out, you're actually creating tension in the canal, in the cavity in which they are supposed to pass. So you actually want to push from above them. That's exactly what I teach you in the Birth Lounge. I also walk you through what this looks like in unmedicated birth and epidural birth, plus what it looks like if you're lying on your back, side lying, hands and knees, and a variety of other upright positions. You're probably going to hear from your hospital staff that it's normal for it to take 2 to 3 hours for a first-time mom to push her baby out. And, well, I don't believe that's normal. It certainly isn't natural when a reflex, a bodily reflex, pushes out your baby. So what is it? Well, it's common. And why? Well, because the hospital system is not designed to help you actually understand the anatomy of your stomach and which muscles are appropriate to push your baby out. And that's where the Secret Sauce to Pushing course comes in. I created this a couple years ago. Thousands of women have come before you and gone through the course and pushed for less than 30 minutes. And I want you to join that club. Plus, you're going to have less tearing. You're going to be less tired, and you're just going to enjoy pushing a lot more if you don't have to work as hard. Join the secret sauce to pushing now. You can find that course at thebirthlounge.com/secret sauce to pushing. That's thebirthlounge.com/secret sauce to pushing. I cannot wait for your baby to come flying out of you and for you to have virtually no tearing. All right, on to today's episode, which also may seem like a pipe dream to you, and that is a world without synthetic food dyes. Now, I know that removing food dyes is all the rage right now with all of the legislation that's going on in our country. And I also recognize that it is not the only problem facing our food industry right now. However, if there's one thing you've learned about me and one thing you've learned about this community, it's that I like to hit problems from multi angles. I love to come at the issues and the challenges that we're facing from many different perspectives so that we can tackle it head on. So will removing food dyes fix our food deserts or remove glyphosate from our food supply? No. Just like it's not going to end our epidemic of highly processed foods, or the fact that our children are being fed complete garbage in public school, which is super problematic. It's also not going to tackle the problem of our astronomical grocery prices, or the fact that most farmers can't even afford to farm their land anymore. To say that our food system in the U.S. is a complete disaster would be an understatement. But what I can tell you is these baby steps that we're taking are eventually going to add up to a complete overhaul of our food system, which will help us Americans not only live healthier, but also have better access to food. Now, if you haven't heard of the documentary To Die For, DYE, then today's episode is going to crack you wide open and get your wheels turning. After discovering their child's sensitivity to synthetic dyes, Brandon and Whitney Cawood embarked on a journey to uncover the hidden impacts of these additives. As parents turned filmmakers, their documentary combines scientific insights and personal stories from affected families, revealing the unseen dangers of synthetic dyes. They walk you through expert interviews and heartfelt narratives aimed to raise awareness of the profound effects these chemicals can have on our children and our families. In today's episode, you're going to hear us talk about which artificial food dyes are currently approved in the U.S. and how reliable the FDA safety evaluation process really is. What does all this legislation mean, and when can we expect to see change in our food system? We're also going to dive into some nerdy things like some studies that prove just how harmful synthetic food dyes are. And I'm going to be asking Whitney and Brandon which food dyes are the absolute worst for our children. As always, we're going to provide you with alternatives like healthier brands and ones that don't include synthetic food dyes. Plus, if you are trying to dye things like, let's say, icing, what can you use instead of artificial food coloring? And we're going to talk about food dyes and synthetic food approvals in other countries. That way, you know exactly where the U.S. stands in terms of standardization. And lastly, but certainly not least, we're going to talk about reading food labels and what parents need to know to keep their eyes peeled for synthetic food dyes in everything that you're purchasing. If you have been wondering about food dyes in your child's food, or maybe you are noticing sensitivities in your children, or maybe you've just been wondering what all the hullabaloo is in social media and on the news about food dyes being removed from our food, then listen up. This episode is for you. It is a complete joy and honor to have Whitney and Brandon join me today. So without further ado, y'all, welcome to the show.
Thank you for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
us.
You guys, I'm so excited. I'm like a little fangirling here. I've been wanting to have you on the show for a long time, and I have followed you for a long time. I want to see your documentary, and I think that the recent legislation in our country is like getting good movement. I'm excited for it. I think there are some naysayers out there, so I'm excited to dive into that. But before we do all that, we talk data, we talk about what our legislation is changing and what kind of things we're starting to see in our country. I think a good place to start is probably how the heck did just two average everyday parents end up being kind of leaders in this movement across our nation to help people understand the things that we need to know about food dyes that are being put in our food and how they're impacting our health and also our children's health.
Yeah, so we are just like very glad to be a part of the movement. So thank you for your sweet words. This has been a very personal journey for us. Our son, our oldest, he's now 7. He just turned 7. Between the ages of 1 and 3, his behavior was a bit erratic. Most days would be really, really rough in that we had a lot of fits, tantrums, hitting, biting, kicking, and a lot of that can be normal at that age, but it was obviously not normal when everywhere we went it became an issue. Play dates, church. He was doing a mother's morning out at the time, so he was just there 2.5 hours a couple days a week, and we had ride-ups almost every day, 2 or 3 ride-ups some days, and we would have to pick him up constantly. And so it got really, really rough, even to the point where they had assigned a teacher to just him to just help make sure that he wasn't hurting other kids. So they were just following him around, grabbing him anytime he was going to do something impulsive. And I'm a former teacher, so that was incredibly traumatizing for me to have a child that was struggling so much with impulse control. And I think what was really confusing for us is that most days would be really rough like that, but then occasionally we would have a really good day and he was easygoing and he didn't have any of the impulse control and like the stimming was gone and we would have no biting and hitting. And so as we were going along our journey, as he got older and older, obviously it became more worrisome. And when he was around 3, everything was coming to an head at his school and, really with us as a family. And we really wanted to help him as much as we could. And we were doing our due diligence. We had consulted doctors and we were doing behavior therapy. And then none of that necessarily seemed to work at all. And so I decided to look at diet because I have a history of autoimmune issues, and diet was really healing for me. And so I found an article that suggested eliminating wheat, dairy, and synthetic dyes. And so we were actually on vacation, so that's how like absolutely desperate we were for help. And so on that vacation, we started looking at everything and we eliminated those 3 things for 30 days straight. And so after about 48 hours, we noticed that we had an easygoing child, like the duration of that 30-day elimination diet. And so it was really kind of crazy. And we were really expecting, most of that to be attributed to the wheat and the dairy because he really wasn't consuming that much synthetic dyes or foods that contain synthetic dyes because we were really, for the most part, eating mostly clean. Like he would occasionally have dyes, like at a party or something like that. But really, on a daily basis, he was only consuming dyes through like his daily allergy medicine and daily Benadryl. And at that point, he was really struggling with, he was having chronic ear infections. So we were kind of we had at least 6 or 7 rounds of antibiotics, which were much more holistic at this point, but we were just, obviously doing what we were told. And so he had several rounds of antibiotics for ear infections. So he's kind of on a Reb 40 loop with his antibiotics. And the doctors said keep giving him Benadryl anytime he gets a runny nose, and then give him daily allergy medicine because the mucus and the sinus drainage was causing the ear infections. And so we were doing all that. And so for 30 days straight, we eliminated all those things and we had our swaps. And then after the 30-day elimination diet, we reintroduced wheat and we saw no effect. And then we reintroduced dairy and we saw no effect. And then when we reintroduced synthetic dyes, within 15 minutes, all those behaviors came flooding back, the hitting, the biting, the tantrums. And it was so obvious. It was almost like you could almost see like a different child, kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was just a very obvious transition. And so we knew that dyes were a big issue for him. And, we several times, even after that, after eliminating dyes, we had instances where we came in contact with dyes and we didn't know it. And so that really was shocking to us because we were consuming such little synthetic dyes. And so that was a journey. And now he's doing so well. He's going into a second grade year. He's in a STEM school, and we haven't had a single issue where he's melted down or hurt a child. He's not on a behavior plan. His teachers describe him as one of the best kids behaviorally and academically. He excels. He's in a German immersion program, and he's in a gifted program, and he's just doing so well. And so to contrast that with when we were going through our journey before we found out he was so sensitive to dyes, I thought I was going to have to homeschool, which I may still homeschool. I love homeschooling. I love the idea of it, but I thought I had to homeschool. And so to protect him and to protect other children, of course, and just to see how stark of a contrast his quality of life is, I really started to dig into the research and try to figure out like what's going on. And honestly, I thought it was kind of a holistic, hokey situation that science probably hadn't caught up to yet. And I was really surprised that there was such a large amount of scientific evidence. And so I told Brandon, I said, I really have so many questions. Even just reading the abstract is really confusing to me. I don't understand what's going on in a child's brain, how something we can eat can impact, our behavior and our brain so much. So I asked Brandon if he'd be willing to document our journey as we interview these experts and the people that have actually done these studies and ask them what's going on. And then along the way, we decided to interview like impacted families. But right around that same time, we started a Facebook group. And that Facebook group, now we're almost at a 3-year mark, but it grew from 0 to almost 100,000 people really quickly. And so we've heard at this point thousands of stories.
Now we're coming up to 1 million. We're at 900.
What did I say?
You said 100,000.
Wow.
Oh, 1 million. Okay. Add another
we just hit 900,000 a week or two ago, and so it's already going up. Well, I think within the next couple of months it'll be at 1 million.
My gosh.
Well,
this is something that's clearly on people's minds.
Well,
yeah.
and we initially thought too, and like even when we first started looking into it in the research, we're like, okay, and even if you look at the research, the way the research is worded, and I guess maybe because of the way the studies have been done, it does say that it's a small percentage of children that it seems to really affect, like noticeably affect. And so in our minds, that was going to be like, we're going to be on this island of a couple people that this might impact. And of course, as the group grew and got larger and larger, and we heard more and more stories, thousands and thousands of stories similar to ours or worse than ours, we realized that, okay, maybe it's not as rare. Like even when you're looking at small percentages of 3%, 8%, like that's still big numbers.
Yeah, millions of people.
When you're thinking of the population.
And also the studies we're talking about, like there are a lot. There are a lot of studies, but they're all looking at hyperactivity, inattentiveness, sleeplessness, and things like that. There haven't really been as many studies on aggression. And it seems like that's so often really the most obvious sign that a child is sensitive to dyes is this aggression that oftentimes is only one of the siblings. Like you will have a sibling group and you're like, why is this one child, raised in the same home so aggressive and so impulsive? And of course, there are other variables. This isn't the only reason why children are aggressive or hyperactive or inattentive, but I think there's enough evidence to say we don't need synthetic dyes at all. But I do think that if there were more studies just looking at the aggression, that we would see even more of an impact. Because just in our group, just anecdotal in the stories we've heard, that's a really big piece of it that I think the science is maybe a little bit behind. But there is evidence that aggression is always something that's noted in many of these studies. And so it might not be one of the key things that they look at. They're more looking at the ADHD type symptoms.
Hyperactivity.
But oftentimes those overlap. And so that has been our experience, and that's where we are.
So that was
Yeah.
a really long answer for your first
Yeah.
question.
No, not at all, you guys. Look, I think this is a conversation that so many of us are wanting to have. And I think it depends on which room you land in, whether the conversation is welcomed or met with resistance, or you're looked at as some like wacko. And you've got some people out there who are like, yes, I 100% believe you. I'm on board with this. I think that we should be managing food dyes as well. And then you've got some people who are like, why the hell are we even focused on food dyes when we've got so many other problems? Which I see that side. I totally
Yeah,
hear you. We've got a lot of problems in our country right now, but food dyes is one of those things.
Right.
So
exactly.
to say like we can't focus on this because we should focus on that, it's like, well, why can't we do both? Why can't we
Right.
combat
We
our
agree.
country with multifaceted approaches
Yeah.
to help us get better, right? Okay, so Whitney, like you, I'm a former teacher before I got into birth work 10 years ago. I was in the early childhood education classroom, and when I saw behavioral issues, it always struck me as a child that was struggling, and that set me apart from a lot of my colleagues. They would feel angry or resentment towards these children, or they would really struggle to like understand, like, why can't this kid just get it? And for me in my brain, it was like, what am I not doing to help this child be able to function better? How can I be a better teacher for them? How can I set my classroom up better for them? As his parents, it must have been so painful to be like, I know this is not who our
Mhm.
child is, but what do we do? What was that like
Mhm.
for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I think oftentimes a mom carries this burden a little bit different than a dad. It was incredibly painful for me. It was the darkest place I've ever been in my life. I've just never I've never dealt with darkness like that. And sadness and disappointment in myself. I just thought I'd be really good at this. I read all the books, I did all the things. I felt like I was trying 10 times harder than I should have to try. And I think, really the motivation for this film was seeing that the child that we met after removing synthetic dyes, that was the child that God created. And these dyes were creating a child that was really not intended to struggle the way he was struggling
Mhm.
and to cause a classroom to struggle the way that they were struggling. And so that was just very eye opening. The fact that, he could have gone his whole life and would have never really been who God really created him to be. And that sounds so overdramatic. I know that there are eye rolls that are listening to this, but to really fully experience a child to do a completely 180 and to see like this is really who he is. And that other kid was really, really, really struggling. And to your point, when I was a teacher, I mean, I know I'm going to get some hate for this. I've never admitted this on a podcast, but I would hand out the Skittles and the M&Ms as rewards just because it was a really good reward system. They listened and I always would say it's like one or two a day max. It's not that big of a deal. And boy, I was probably creating those issues in my classroom. So I am not pointing fingers or trying to make anybody feel bad for not knowing what you don't know. But this is very real. And, not every child reacts as dramatically as ours. But we know that thousands or maybe even millions of families have had the same experience or even more painful. Some families have experienced, if a child has dealt with this for such a long time, like suicidal ideation and self-harm and having issues like that. And then when you remove the dyes, they can just be, and those thoughts kind of subside and everything gets a little bit easier. So synthetic dyes are a chemical, and every one of us react to chemicals differently. And so it's much like medications. Some medications you can tolerate, and some medications other people can't tolerate. And so this is a very, very real thing. And I'm so glad to see that so many people are on board and that there has been less resistance than I expected. And so we're happy to be here, and we feel like our film was very God ordained to come out at the just right time.
One and on top of like to add to what you were saying, we have even with our platform and stuff because we'll post things from time to time, and we have a Facebook page with 80 something thousand people that follow just the film itself, and so we we do posts that sometimes get some traction and stuff. And so you'll have people who show up in the comments who aren't necessarily have any idea who we are. It just kind of makes its way to them. And it's like, why are you guys focusing so much on dye when there's, sugar is terrible. All these foods that have dye, even if you remove the dye, they're still going to be horrible for you. And like, we get that, but like, we've kind of taken the approach is like, if we talked about everything, like it's hard to get stuff done when you're focused on so many different assets of like this chemical and this chemical and this additive and this, all like we laser focused on dyes because one, that was such a big part of our story. And two, like it's a really easy place to start. With a lot of the other additives, there's an argument for it. If it's preservative, it adds to shelf life. If it's sugar or some sort of flavor profile, there's an argument for like why it's important and why it's used or whatever. But with dyes, there's literally no argument outside of like it's cosmetic. And so like it's a great place to start for people to start learning how to read labels and looking at chemicals or additives in their food. And we, because of that argument, because of the fact that there is no plus side to it, like we obviously also felt like we could make some traction. You know what I mean? Like there's not a whole lot of pushback outside of, well, the FDA says that they're safe. They've said they're safe for decades. And so that's kind of the main argument. And so that's kind of why we, obviously because of our story, but then just the laser focusing on that one issue is what can really help move the needle.
When they no longer have that, they can't say that
anymore.
Now the FDA has now acknowledged that they are not safe.
Yeah. So now that the FDA is saying they're not safe, so that argument's out the window. But yeah, it's like if we're focusing on dyes, and there seems to be a lot of people focused on dyes, but if you take our approach and you have a bunch of people, and there's people looking at glyphosate, there's people looking at seed oils and all this other stuff. So like the food dye, that's just the lane that we're in, and that's what we're focused on. So it's not that we think that food dye is the only thing wrong with the food system. That's completely opposite. That's just what we're locked in on and what we're trying to make happen. So.
Well, yeah, we all have to put our puzzle piece in to make the whole puzzle of like fixing the system, right? It's kind of how I feel about my space in birth is like I help women avoid birth trauma in the hospital system, and there are other people who help people have empowered C-sections and help them have great home births and counsel our doctors and our nurses and do teachings on trauma-informed care. I'm doing my part, and everyone else can do their part, and then we will eventually come together and hopefully fix our healthcare system.
Exactly.
And it's so funny to hear you guys say that the FDA kind of retracted that. If we look at the history of the FDA, they do the best they can, maybe, with the information that they have at the time. And then when they get new information, they retract it and they replace it with updated guidelines. I mean, we used to tell women that it was fine to smoke and drink in pregnancy, and now we know those two things are not good, right? Like, if you look at the history of all the things that have been retracted, it takes new and updated information. It takes people like all of us saying, like, hey, we've got to pay attention to this. Hey, we're starting to notice these things that it seems like you guys didn't catch, or maybe you didn't care enough to look into them when you first made your recommendation. And so I love grassroots efforts that actually make an impact. It's like one of the things I love about America so much is that we have that freedom to be able to say, if you care about this, meet us at the park at 3 p.m. We are going to make, our voices known. And I love it so much when it makes big impact. So you guys were talking about, not everybody reacts the same way to food dyes. You have other children. I also want to know about you two. Is your first child the only person in your family that kind of reacts this way, or are you seeing it impact you guys and your other child kind of in the same way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my husband is not sensitive at all to anything.
I'm her husband.
Brandon, we are married. Brandon is not sensitive to anything. And our daughter, she doesn't seem to have the same reaction as him. And of course, we are a dye-free family now, but the times that she has consumed it, or there's been a couple of times we're like, let's just see, a while back, a couple of years ago. But yeah, no, she doesn't seem to react at all. And even whenever he was younger, he would even react to like temporary tattoos and markers and things like that. So he is very sensitive. Now he can wash his hands with soap that has dyes, and like we don't see like a massive reaction. We just say, just wash it off really quickly. But yeah, no, she doesn't. He does. And then I am sensitive to dyes. And I didn't even know until about a year after we started filming our documentary that I'm for the most part dye free. I mean, I really didn't consume anything with dyes on the regular anyway. And then I avoid antibiotics like the plague now, but I had a situation where I had to take an antibiotic, and I did, and I didn't want to, for my children, if they have to take an antibiotic, I will like move mountains to make sure it's dye free. Like I'll call every pharmacy and do the runaround. But for myself, I was like, I'm not going to be the squeaky wheel for once. And I just decided to take it, and it was a very bad idea. And I was up all night. I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I was very irritable, and I'm like, oh, I feel bad. This is what he feels like.
Well,
And
and
so,
in the past, you would have never connected those
no,
dots.
I would have just thought, and I think so many people think my child is terrible. They've been sleeping terrible, and it's because of the ear infection. It's because of the whatever they have. And I'm like, it could be that, or it could be the dyes. Maybe they're sensitive to dyes. And so,
Tylenol or
yeah, so we're all different. And, we have interviewed researchers all over the US and even in the EU. And the researcher we interviewed in the EU, his research is the reason why the EU has a warning label. So dyes are not banned in the EU, but they do have a warning label, which manufacturers opt out of using that warning label because they don't want it on their products. So most of their products are dye free, but he was a geneticist, or is a geneticist, and he was really curious about these children and their genetics and the ones that really reacted. And this has not been replicated, but he did find that there was a genetic variation between the kids that like my son versus a child that doesn't react. And so he noticed, and there could be lots of genes that factor into this, but he noticed a particular histamine gene. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an allergic reaction, but the cells themselves release histamine, and histamine can cause issues with sleep and affect neurotransmitters. Sleep affects it is a neurotransmitter, but it affects your irritability and your mood and things like that. So that does make sense. So, that was something we were hoping to get to the bottom of, like, why did everyone react differently? And I guess it's just as intuitive as that. Everybody's body is completely different. And so everybody has different genetics and responds differently to chemicals. And some people can consume wheat, some people can't consume wheat. So it's the same with foods. And
then we didn't touch on the genetic stuff in the documentary. One, because it hadn't been replicated, and two, we didn't want to confuse people because we didn't want them hearing the word histamine and all of a sudden being like, oh, well, this is just an allergic reaction. This is similar to it's not an allergic reaction, because there's studies out there that have shown that dyes can actually cause microscopic changes in the brain. And so allergic reaction doesn't do that. It's not affecting the brain. So we didn't want to confuse people and like make them think, well, this is like, why would we remove something that's just an allergy? Like we don't remove peanuts, and it's like so it's different. It's not an allergic reaction. When we're speaking of histamine, we're not talking about like a histamine response. We're talking about it actually is affecting those electrons, however.
We are not scientists.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but the neurotransmitters, it can affect how it operates in the brain. So it is different than an allergic reaction. Now, some people can actually be like anaphylactically allergic to certain dyes.
A lot of children actually.
But the main thing that we're talking about, the main thing that the studies are looking at, are like neurobehavioral issues and things like that. They're not allergic reactions.
It makes me think about people like myself who have MCAS, which is mast cell activation syndrome, right? And that's a histamine-based syndrome. And you guys listening, if you haven't listened to my episode with Dr. Zach Spiritos, go back and listen to that. Fantastic episode, one of our most popular episodes. It makes me wonder if people like me, or even my children, will be more sensitive to dyes. I live a pretty dye-free life, and I'm very kind of acutely aware of how different foods and things impact me. But it just makes me kind of think, if you're already struggling with a histamine-based, diagnosis of some sort, are you a little bit more prone to maybe being more sensitive to dyes?
I would say there's something there. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, like if you have a lot of food allergies in your family, maybe this will happen. Or if you have autoimmune issues in your family, or Crohn's disease. And So there is something there. There are certain
Something
people who
genetic,
are
yeah.
more sensitive than others. And I think that's one reason why legislation is so important. We can't genetically test every single person. And this is synthetic dyes are a chemical that's only used to brighten our food. They don't taste good. They don't add, actually, if you add too much synthetic dyes, like it's very chemically. And so we really don't feel like there's any reason for it. Industry just uses synthetic dyes to brighten our food so that we will want to buy it. And oftentimes industry adds it to children's food so that it's more marketable and more beautiful. And so they're just trying to sell us a product is the reality. And so if it is associated with this many issues on top of, we haven't even gone into the genotoxicity, that some of these dyes can cause cancer or tumors or damage your DNA, and that DNA can be passed to your child or from their child, from them to their child. And so there's so many issues associated with it. I just believe wholeheartedly we need to err on the side of caution, especially when it comes to school foods, especially when it comes to any government funded agency. And then of course we would obviously love, at least at the bare minimum, a warning label in the US similar to the EU, just because it is really unnecessary. And, we know that manufacturers can create products that are dye-free using natural dyes. We always say dye-free, but you use a natural dye. You use something like turmeric or spirulina or beetroots. And that's what they did when the EU added a warning label. Within a year, manufacturers, American manufacturers like M&M's, Mars Candy, they reformulated their products so that the EU had a version that's dye-free, minus blue one. They do still continue to use blue one, but they have reformulated the red 40s, the yellow 5s, the yellow 6, all the other dyes, and they have a dye-free version. So the rhetoric that we're hearing here in the US, it's going to cost more, blah, 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 all of that's a lie. Literally all of it's a lie. You can compare prices with the EU, with the dye-free versions. You can look and see, like, you can compare an Aldi Fruit Loops compared to Fruit Loops brand. You're going to save money on the dye-free version. So they can do it. It is difficult in that they may have to spend some time reformulating American factories. But this is the cost. Like it's either them, it's going to cost them a little inconvenience maybe. They already have the formula, maybe they just have to email the formula to the US and try to figure out how to, make it work in their factory. That may be an issue, but it's at the cost of so many children that are having so many issues. And when ADHD is just going up and we have other rates of issues with children, it's just going up and up. This is just something that can alleviate millions of children and adults, and it just be such an easy fix. And we know with Red 3, we've known since 1990, and the studies were done even before that Red 3 causes cancer in animals. And legally, the FDA is not allowed to have something in our food system because of the Delaney Clause that we know causes cancer in animals. And
Or
so
humans.
or in humans. And so for over 35 years, Red 3 was in our food system. It was in Pediasure, which I know my children were always low birth weight and little babies. I always have little babies. And we were always encouraged to do something like Pediasure. Luckily, I made like a protein smoothie at home and we opted not to do that. But, that's something that families consume on a daily basis, something that we know causes cancer in animals. Like that's an issue. And so the FDA, we're a little bit more cynical at this point with the FDA. There were tons of agencies, specifically CSPI, have been asking the government, the FDA, to look at synthetic dyes and to look at, especially Red 3. We know it causes cancer in animals. On the FDA's website, it says it causes cancer in animals.
Well,
And their response, yeah, you can finish the story.
They banned it in 1990 in cosmetics. So it had already been permanently approved around sometime, I think around either 59 or 69. I can't remember my exact dates, but it was already permanently approved in food. For whatever reason, when the cosmetic industry petitioned to get it permanently approved in cosmetics, the FDA asked for more studies to be done. So they did studies. They found in the early 80s that feeding it to rats was causing tumors.
Once again, they fed it to rats.
So yeah, they fed it to rats. The rats got tumors. And so they essentially from like 1983 to 1990 gave the cosmetic and externally applied drug industry like multiple options to prove the mechanism. That was because that was kind of the argument. Like okay, we're seeing it in rats, but the mechanism that's causing the cancer in rats isn't the same for humans. So hypothetically, so they gave industry extension after extension to, because essentially, if they could prove that they could prove the mechanism and prove that it didn't exist in humans, they were going to give approval to it in cosmetics. But so they, after multitude of extensions, after about 7 years, they finally ended up banning it in cosmetics because they were never able to prove that it would be safe for humans. And so you hear that argument a lot. Well, the only reason they got rid of Red 3 was because of the Delaney clause, but the mechanism that causes the cancer in rats is not the same. But they never proved that. And so, but it was already permanently approved in food. So in 1990, when they banned it in cosmetics, the FDA said that they were going to take steps to ban it in food. So they knew that it caused cancer, or they knew that it was carcinogenic, and they knew that they were going to remove it from food. But for whatever reason, they just kept kind of kicking it down the road,
35 years
dragging
later.
their feet. And they really only, like, the CSPI and some other agencies petitioned them in 2022. They sent a petition, and they're supposed to respond to petitions within 40 days. Well, they didn't respond to it until they just banned it in January of 2025. And I think the only reason that happened, well, one of two reasons. I think it started to get so much public press with things happening, the Maha movement happening, people talking about Red 3, RFK potentially coming into office, and him talking about synthetic dyes, and then the administration, the Biden administration, knew that they were leaving, and so it was like it's kind of the writing was on the wall for Red 3, so they went ahead and banned it. That administration banned it as a win for that administration. So, but we look back, if this movement wouldn't happen, if this noise around it wouldn't have happened, it would probably still be. I mean, it still is in food right now. It doesn't have to be eliminated until 2028, but like it probably wouldn't even be a talking point. So it's crazy
Food
that
and medication.
So to argue that the FDA says something safe, or the FDA like this, like if you look back at the history, like that's not really something that's reliable. Just to say that the FDA claims that it's safe. Well, how many things has the FDA said that's safe just to, years later change their tune and be like, okay, we were wrong about that. And sweep it under the rug. Whoops, sorry. Like, so that's not really a strong argument to make. But that's the argument that industry makes.
Well, and they have a history of sweeping things under the rug. Whenever you're looking at decades and decades and decades, we have had studies that have shown that synthetic dyes can cause issues with inattentiveness, sleeplessness, irritability, and aggression. And, there's literally 27 clinical trials just looking at that on children. There's also animalistic evidence and in vitro evidence. And so there's a slew of studies. And, when you put those together, that's a very, very strong evidence. And that's why in California, they did that. They had a meta-analysis, and they looked at all of these studies together combined. And, the conclusion was what we've known all along, that these dyes are an issue. And so it's not that the FDA doesn't know it's not that they haven't read these studies. It's just an issue of, it would be, my assumption is, they are understaffed. I can empathize with that. But unless it's a massive fire that people are really mad about, they're not dealing with it. And so
they're not obligated. The FDA has no obligation to reevaluate a chemical that they've already approved. I think there was a state, I think California just tried to or not California, New York just tried to pass a bill. And it may still be, there may be another state that's still doing it, like where a company or FDA, trying to force the FDA to reevaluate chemicals that have been shown by science that maybe there's an issue to like have to reevaluate those. But right now they have zero obligation to. So if they approve it, there's nobody forcing them to reevaluate it. Even if the science that created the conclusion that it was safe was done in the 60s and 70s, like long before the advances in science that we have now, they're not obligated to go back and look. So it's really hard to get them to do that. And so, like, I don't know, luckily they're feeling the pressure now. And if you look, there's a lot of pushback that we hear is like, if these dyes are only impacting such a small percentage of people, and I don't think it's really safe for anybody, but people consider it, safe. Like, why can't people just make the choice? Like, why don't we just let people make their own choices and choose things? And so twofold. So like, one, you have to know that it's an issue to make that choice. You have to realize that it's causing these issues. And for the majority, even with all the noise around it, when the Maha movement, what we've realized is like, that's still a bubble. You know what I mean? Like, the people in the health space and the people who are looking into these things in our world, it seems like everybody knows. It seems like everybody's talking about it because that's kind of how our algorithm is set up now. It's all the health space. But like when we go out and talk to regular everyday people, this is still something that they're widely unaware of. Like, they might have heard something because it is being talked about on the news here and there, but like the vast majority of people, it's not something that's completely on their radar. So to say, just let them make a personal choice, well, it's hard to make a personal choice if you don't know all the information. And so that's why, like, at the bare minimum, we feel like a lot of these dyes should have a warning label similar to the EU. But on the other hand, like, when these dyes were approved, they were technically approved because they met the standard of safe for the FDA. Now, I have it pulled up here. So, like, this is like the definition for safe for additives in the FDA is a reasonable certainty that a chemical is not harmful for its intended use. So a reasonable certainty of no harm. Well, at the time when these things were approved, it kind of met that standard of safe. But now at this point,
we know it does cause harm.
There's a reasonable certainty of harm. So like, it's kind of
and that's really hard in like the research community to say something is causal. Well, that's what all the researchers we interviewed said. We know that synthetic dyes can cause this in some children. And people get hung up on that can, and it's not like it can or it can't. The reason why there's a can is because some people can react that way and some people don't react that way. You know what I mean? So it's such an issue, but to kind of piggyback off what Brandon was saying, the people that are impacted the most are oftentimes people that have the least education, the lowest financial circumstances, like people in poverty. And the reality is, I mean, even our own doctors, they hadn't heard about it. But to say that a child that is in like extreme poverty, say you have a single mom, and I taught in an inner city school. This is not like, it's not like it doesn't exist. There are people who are really, really struggling. And, I had a lot of children. We have a really vibrant, beautiful, like Latin community where we live. It's a very diverse, beautiful city. And I had a couple of students that, their family came from Guatemala, and they didn't know their child's birthday or how to spell their child's name. And we're really struggling. And so to say, I expected that mom to know whether or not this is harming their child, it's not the same. Like, it's not the same. That mother will probably never know. It's not going to come across her news feed. It's not going to be something that she is, I mean, maybe it could, but what are the odds that it's just not fair. It's not a fair shakeup. And so just to say it's like personal choice is difficult for us because it's not the same for everyone. And then on top of that, not everybody has access to an Aldi or a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods. And, some of the children that I taught, they took a taxi to school, and they would, like, a lot of their groceries would come from like the convenience store that they could walk to. And so it's just not fair to say that, okay, that mom needs to be responsible for her child and figure out if dyes and memorize all 9 synthetic dyes and to be able to read a label in English and to know that every single product that has dyes. And then, that child, okay, their school is not dye free because most schools are not dye free. Well, whenever that child gets a Pop-Tart, should that child say no to the Pop-Tart? No. Should that mom have to provide a dye-free Pop-Tart from Trader Joe's and take a taxi 30 minutes away? Like, it's just not, when you look at it on a granular level, it's not the same. We're not all the same. And so, like, whenever you zoom out and be like, oh, this is just something that's used to brighten our food, why wouldn't we just protect everyone? Why wouldn't we just remove a chemical? It's just such a no-brainer, which is why I feel like so many states are jumping on board with banning it in public schools. And, West Virginia has now banned it in the entire state. And so it just seems pretty intuitive at this point. When you have all the information, we need to be protecting children. And of course, this affects adults as well, but we're just so passionate about the people that don't have a voice. They eat what they're given. And so that's obviously a hot topic for us.
OMG, I'm getting so close to the 3rd trimester. And let's be honest, pregnancy is so magical, but also exhausting, swollen, sweaty. And let me just say it, it's not always glam. That's why I'm here to introduce you to the softest, most luxurious way to pamper yourself while growing a tiny human. Cozy Earth. You have heard me talk about them so much because they have genuinely made such a big difference in my pregnancy, and I cannot wait to also have them in postpartum. Their bamboo pajamas are what I call an instant exhale. They stretch with my belly, they feel like silk without the sweat, and somehow they always make me feel put together, even when I'm still wearing my PJs at 4 p.m. Whether you're lounging, nesting, or napping in between kicks, these PJs are the cozy hug that you didn't know that you needed. And if you're anything like me, your bed becomes your command center during pregnancy. Cozy Earth's bamboo sheets are what dreams are made of. Literally. They're breathable, moisture wicking, and cool to the touch so that you can kiss those middle of the night hot flashes and sweats goodbye. Plus, you can try them risk-free for 100 nights with their sleep trial, and they come with a 10-year warranty. This is next level comfort. You deserve to feel pampered, cared for, and downright luxurious while you're doing the world's hardest job. Growing a human. Use code HEHE for 40% off at CozyEarth.com. That's almost half off to give your body the gift of restful nights and luxurious lounging during the day. And you know what I always say, a cozy mama makes for a well-loved baby. Try Cozy Earth because growing a baby deserves nothing less than 5-star comfort. Visit CozyEarth.com and use code HEHE for 40% off.
Well, and that was a driving factor for the film because, like Whitney said, she taught these students and these families in these circumstances, and it was like our initial reason for making the film was just to help spread the word and educate. Like, obviously, a pipe dream is like maybe down the road legislation will happen, but like we've got to educate people, and we look at it all, and we all look at it as like this was all set up and was all God's timing. Like, if we would have like we kept thinking, okay, we were taking too long to put the film out. If we would have released our film a year earlier, it might have been released to more people that hadn't heard about it yet. It might have been more of like, ooh, this is interesting. But it ended up coming out in January, the day before they actually banned Red 3. So like when our film came out, like we never could have imagined that our film could have reached a legislative impact as quickly as it did. Like our initial goal, like I said, was just to educate. And I still think I feel like our film has probably reached a lot of people who are in the health space and are already kind of aware of this, but like we still think our film has a very important place for people who have no idea like why this is an issue or that it is an issue. And it's a great tool for legislators to use to like get the structure of like why legislation about this is so important and how it's affecting people. So that's been a pretty cool thing. So like yeah, I'd say all that to say that one of the biggest reasons we made the film was to educate people who may not ever hear this any other way. So
I think it's very frustrating that we have organizations like the FDA. I mean, the same could be said about the CDC that are tasked with keeping us safe, working for us, making decisions that we should be able to trust. Yet there are so many examples. I mean, the Monsanto cases, the corruption that the Sackler family was allowed to engage in. I mean, that's borderline exploitation of the American people, right? Just like straight up taking advantage of the American people. And the FDA knew about it the
yeah,
whole
I've been watching Dope Sick here lately, and like
I
that's
mean,
pretty cool. It's crazy what
you
happened with
know,
that.
it is. It really is crazy. And then when you call stuff out like that, it's like, well, you're the quack. And it's like, am I the quack or am I just the one that is like kind of waking up to the fact that I'm the only person that can make decisions for me and
Yeah.
can't trust anyone else that can do that for me. And I think that's a real psychological hardship, especially if you have a lot of trust in these organizations and you have been raised to believe that if the FDA says it's true and it's safe, then that makes it true and safe. And it can feel really a lot. You can feel guilt and shame and embarrassment and like you were taken advantage of once you realize, wow, these organizations, they may not have always had our best interests at heart. They actually did have the data this whole time, and they weren't willing to retract their statements and put out something that really was keeping us safe. And I think you guys do a really great job of kind of tackling that question of why do you care so much about food dyes if we have so many bigger broken pieces? Whitney, you said it perfectly when it's like there are so many parents in our country right now that are dealing with much bigger issues that they couldn't care about food dyes if they wanted to. It's just not part of their plate. They have so much other stuff on their plate right now that food dyes are the least of their concern. And so, what we would like as the American people is to just have those agencies that are supposed to keep us safe do what they say they're going to do. Just keep us safe so that when I go to the grocery store, I know that I'm buying food that's not going to actively harm my children. Which kind of leads me to my next question. Were you guys just rocked to your core with how many foods had synthetic food dyes once you kind of started on this journey? I mean, were you like, oh my God, we're never going to be able to buy anything else in the grocery store ever again? We're going to have to make everything from scratch to make sure that it was dye free.
Lucky for us. I mean, like I said, most of what we consumed was already dye free, but we really only had to find swaps for like the candy canes and like Halloween treats and fall treats and things like that. And so, when we first started several years ago, it was a lot harder, but now there's so many like dye-free options and brands, and Aldi is such an affordable way to eat dye-free and actually save money. And so there's just a lot more options now. And of course, like we avoid more than just dyes. We do eat more of a whole foods diet, but I mean, our children like treats just like every other child. And so they are not neglected in any way. They have fun. They have a wonderful childhood. It's very balanced. And so we were surprised. We heard a recent study. Do you remember what was it,
Yeah,
60%?
there's a study that says 1 in 5 products marketed to children contain synthetic dye. So 20% of like
That was
products.
shocking because I do kind of feel like we are, and I mean, everybody's in their own bubble. Like, if you're homeschool, you're in the homeschool bubble. If you are in this industry, you're in the industry bubble. If you're, very affluent, you're in that affluence bubble. So, like, I think our bubble is mostly dye free. So, like, to me, I feel like there's so many dye free options. Like, you really can find a swap for everything. And so, to actually figure out that synthetic dyes were so pervasive, I mean, we knew they're pervasive, but that was
When you're
a staggering number.
when you're like, and like you said, our the way that we grocery shop and things are a lot different. When you look at the standard American diet, the average people are eating a pretty heavy portion of ultra processed food, and so ultra processed food is going to be where you find the majority of synthetic dyes. And then like we said, a lot of children's products, a lot of the cereals and the Pop Tarts and the sweet treats and even the fruit snacks and the fruit roll ups and the things that are, I don't know, that our brain, a lot of people have been programmed to like, well, a fruit roll up
It
is
has fruit.
a little bit healthy. It's got fruit in the word in the name. It can't be that bad. So a lot of the ultra processed foods are where you're going to find your dyes. And
They are
in
hidden in certain places
well,
though
yeah,
that you don't
and then there's some
expect.
places like breads and marshmallows and like different
Muffins,
muffin mixes and things like that. But in
marshmallows.
theory, you can say, well, people shouldn't be eating that much ultra processed food anyways. They should be, if you wanna have a healthy diet, you should avoid. But like the truth of the matter is like that is the standard American diet. There's the majority of people. That's what the majority of people are eating. Then they're going to be hard. They are going to be hard to avoid. They're in, most a lot of people aren't making even like when they're making cakes or cupcakes or things like they're not really making it from scratch. They're making it from a box. They're getting their icing from a can. It's hard. Like a couple of years ago, we could not find a can of, or I guess it's a can. What is it? Is it called a can of the plastic?
Tub of
Icing.
icing.
Whatever the
Tub.
I
There you
tub,
go,
yeah, the little
tub.
tub of ice. We could not find a white icing that did not have dye in it. And then most of the chocolate also had dye in it, like that was supposed to just be brown. You would think that would be brown from cocoa powder or something, but they were using reds and yellows to get that brown color. So it's in a lot of places, and so it really is invasive, and it's really hard to avoid them, even if you know that you should avoid them. If you really have to kind of be making a lot of things from scratch and stuff like that. So it's
Well, and people aren't even thinking about like you even need to avoid it in like toothpaste and mouthwash and soaps. Like if your child reacts, they're going to react to a little bit in their toothpaste. So like, and a lot of people think, oh, well, I can just limit it and I'll see if there's a difference. And they're like, there's no difference. But the reality is, like, our son, he ate one mini marshmallow and it affected 72 hours. Like, it and it just had blue one. It was just one dye, one mini marshmallow. So if a child is I mean, similar, I mean, don't eat me alive for this, people, but it's similar to somebody who's allergic. Like you wouldn't tell somebody who has a peanut allergy, well, you will just avoid it and you can just eat a little bit of, just brush your teeth with a little bit of peanut butter. Like you wouldn't tell somebody to do that. You're going to spit out most of it anyway. Like that's not how it works. Like if you are sensitive to something, and especially if your child, is genetically predispositioned to have a neurologic reaction, it dies. I mean, it makes sense why brushing their teeth with something that has dyes could continue a reaction that would just continue and continue and continue, which is why we feel like it's so unneeded. But it really does pop up in a lot of places you wouldn't expect. And so that was really surprising to us.
Well, we get a lot of questions too, like how do you know if a kid is eating all this ultra processed food, how do you know that it's dye specifically? How do you know it's not the sugar or another preservative? And, for some kids, some kids may be reacting to something different, but we know for a fact that our kid, because we can give Atreyu a Pop-Tart that has no dye in it and he has no reaction. So it's essentially the same thing. It's got the same amount of sugar. It's got the same amount of, we don't, we don't, we don't eat a lot of stuff like that, but like he's on occasion had that. We can give him Fruit Loops from Aldi on occasion and it has no reaction, but we give him the ones that have dye in it, where that's really the main difference we can see. So for at least our family and for our son, we have narrowed it down to the synthetic dyes. So we hear that argument a lot. Like, how do you know it's dyes? How do you know it's not the sugar? How do you know it's just like, because when you remove the dyes, you're removing all the food that has the sugar and the preservatives and stuff. So, and not that any of those things are okay. Our Facebook group, we focus like only on dye-free discussion, which we get a lot of pushback from that because people are like, well, even if you remove the dyes from these products, all the other ingredients are garbage too. And like, we acknowledge that. But once again, it all goes back to that, like, we're trying to focus on one thing. And we don't want to discourage somebody who is kicking the tires of going dye-free, who's excited that they found a box of cereal without dyes that their kid will actually eat. We don't want to discourage them from this journey by telling them how awful everything else is in the cereal. You know what I mean?
And for a lot of people, it's a beginning
to
look at other chemicals. Yeah.
We call it a gateway. Dyes are a gateway to reading labels.
I love that. I mean, we all have to start somewhere, right? I think for me, when I did start to pay attention to dyes, thanks to your documentary, I was just shocked. I mean, I could not believe, I was like, well, this is white. So there can't be any dyes in it. And you flip it over and you're like, oh my God, there's so many. Like, how is this white when there are 15 dyes in it? I was just completely taken aback. Could not believe it. And I actually found that it was almost a bell curve for me. The more I looked into it, the more I felt overwhelmed because I found like it was like every single thing had dyes in it. And I did feel like, oh my God, I'm going to have to make my own butter. I'm gonna have to buy a cow to get my own milk. I'm gonna have to buy chickens to get my own eggs. Like, what in the world is happening here? And then you come to the other side of that bell curve and you start to learn brands that you can trust and that are dye-free. So what are, just like off the top of your head, some of your staple brands that you love that families can trust to be dye-free, that they can make easy swaps in their homes?
Luckily, the off brands or like the generic brands are oftentimes they do have like a dye-free version. So I think that only works in favor for us. So always shop generic. Like, for example, Jet Puff marshmallows have blue one, but we have not come across a generic brand that does have blue one. I'm sure there's one out there, but we have not come across a generic brand that does. So I really love Aldi. Of course, I've mentioned Aldi just because you're able to buy organic and clean foods for a really good price. And then even if you are wanting to get the sugary cereals and things like that, just to swap for your children, you can find that there. And they have dye-free Pop-Tarts.
Well, Aldi brand products, for the most part, every now and then there's an outlier that somehow has it in it. But Aldi, even on their website, state that they celebrate it. Like the Aldi brand products are supposed to be dye-free. So like their version of cereals and their version of everything else is dye-free.
Trader Joe's is a really good option.
Trader Joe's is the same way.
And I think that's where it will get a little bit more expensive is like candies, which of course we don't buy candies all the time, but M&Ms, like oftentimes people will get Unreal. Unreal is a great brand, but Trader Joe's M&Ms are like $2.99 a bag. So it's like comparable comparable price wise. So like you can do that if you have a Trader Joe's in
Yum
your
Earth.
area.
Yum Earth is a good candy
Yum Earth is
company.
great.
Joyride.
Joyride is fun and it's really easy to find at like a Target and Walmart and things like that. Also, Walmart brand Better Good, they have just come out with a dye-free sprinkle. And it may have other things that you want to avoid, but
Better Good has, it seems like they're coming out with a lot of dye-free products.
yeah.
So Great Value isn't always dye-free, like their Great Value brand sometimes, but like the new Better Good. Now I won't say always because I don't know for sure, but like it seems like that's kind of their new brand to kind of be dye-free and less additives and things like that. So
For holiday stuff, I would say Yum Earth is great. And then
Supernatural is a great company for
Supernatural
like
has
sprinkles and
incredible
icing and
sprinkles.
things like that. They a lot of people don't realize that Supernatural also makes synthetic or like makes like dyes, right? They make
Yeah.
like powders and stuff for like coloring, and then it's really really vibrant.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
then No Way is another great brand.
Nice. All right.
there's it's really getting to the point to where there's a lot of brands that are dye free, and then we're seeing a lot of movement. So I don't know. This is kind of going off in another direction, but obviously the
Wrap it
FDA
up, Brandon.
the FDA and HHS back in April announced like their plan to phase out synthetic dyes by like the end of 2026, which in theory is very positive, very good. We're very optimistic about it, but there is like there was some confusion when that happened. You know, a lot of stuff came out in the news that the FDA is banning dyes by the end of 20, like that was an actual ban. And so we talk about this a lot. So the FDA has not officially banned synthetic dyes. There is no legal premise for companies to have to remove. What it is, it's a plan.
plan.
It's a plan, and the plan relies on industry voluntarily removing dyes from their portfolio. So
And a lot of them have.
yeah, we're seeing some movement. Kraft Heinz has announced that they're going to have dyes out. Now they've pushed it forward a year, like the FDA said, the end of 2026. They're all saying the end of 2027. So Kraft Heinz, General Mills, PepsiCo announced like a couple of their product brand lines, like Lay's and what was the other? Oh, their tortilla chips. Now they haven't announced anything about like drinks or anything like that. And then I said General Mills. I'm trying to think who
But
else.
Spangler and other brands like that have just
Yes,
outright said,
Spangler is the company that makes Dum Dums. They've come out and said we're not removing dyes.
well, it's like 99% of their portfolio.
Mars
So,
Candy has come out and said they're not going to be removing dyes.
so there is still need for legislation change, like
And
at a state level.
a lot of that's coming from the association. So there's like the National Confectioners Association. They've been very vocal about, you know, unless this is a law, we're not removing dyes. There's a really big organization called the International Association of Color Manufacturers. I think that's so they're like, I mean, their whole their whole association is based around not
What is
and
it?
it's
Their
around
tagline is like to, what was their
spread the
tagline?
use of color throughout the world. So like they are the associations of the people that make synthetic dyes.
Well, and then if you go to their funding page, it makes sense.
So like
who's funding
if
them.
we like their whole association basically, I mean they also represent people who make like natural dyes, but the majority of their people they're representing are the companies that are actually making the synthetic dyes, and then their associate partners are like Mars Candy and all these other like other PepsiCo and stuff like that. So the associations are being very vocal about we think that dyes are safe. Nothing has been proven otherwise. And a lot of these big companies kind of hide behind their associations. So you haven't heard anything from a lot of companies have said nothing.
But this is why it's so important, like at a state level. We've already, like organizations like CSBI and EWG have petitioned the FDA for decades to address this issue, and they're not. And so you kind of have to go at it at a state level to create this. They always complain, industry. Every time we've testified, we've worked in several different states on legislation, and we will always hear industry saying it's creating a patchwork of West Virginia has banned dyes and Utah has banned it in public schools and Georgia hasn't banned anything. And so like it's creating this patchwork, but it's like obviously like that's what we're trying to do because nothing is happening at a national level. But now we are seeing some movement and we are seeing a plan and some good steps. And so we just need to get across the finish line and we just need to not relent, because if we relent, then it's just gonna, and then companies have also like taken out dyes, like Trix actually removed dyes. Customers hated it and then they added them back in. And
Yeah,
so,
so we're like
that can happen unless there is legal legislation. That can happen.
yeah, and so we're a little like we're optimistic about all these companies coming out and saying we're going to remove dyes by the end of whatever. but we're also a little hesitant. Like,
We have trust issues.
we'll believe it when we see it, because there's history. So in around 2015, Mars Candy, Kellogg's, General Mills all made these really big announcements. They got tons of press how they were going to remove dyes from their portfolio. So like Whitney said, General Mills tried it with a couple of cereals, Trix being one of them. I think their sales went up at first, and then their sales started to plummet. People were losing their mind on the internet how they've ruined their childhood, and so they ended up putting the dyes back in. Mars and Kellogg's, they made these commitments and then like never actually did it. So that's why Kellogg's has been in the news so much, because they said in 2015 they were going to have it out by 2018, and never happened. Same thing with General Mills.
They're a little late.
So like without any actual legislation, even now, like these companies that are saying they're going to do it, they very well may do it. Like this administration is only going to be in office for so long. If there's no law based like where they actually have to do it, if they do it and their sales go down and they start losing profits and like losing customers, there's nothing stopping them from turning around and putting it back in.
Well, this is like a negative spiral. I do want to go back to some like happy things. Like if you do buy organic, that innately is going to be dye free, because synthetic dyes are a man-made chemical. And also there's a lot of companies like Panera. They're like beautiful, bright, vibrant treats. They're all 100% dye free. And Starbucks, their treats are dye free, and there's a lot of new companies that are popping up that are going dye free, and so I do think that you can still have fun. Oh yeah, In-N-Out has announced that they're going to be dye free. So there's ways that you can have fun and then also be dye free.
I just think it's really important to vote for your dollar, and I say that all the time on my Instagram, on my podcast, inside the birth lounge. Like, vote with your dollar. And look, I guess if you want dye in your food, then I'm glad that you have Tricks to fall back on. That,
Yeah.
they added it back in. You threw a fit. You thought they were ruining the nostalgia. If you're up for handling the aggression, then go for it. But I do think it's really important for those of us that want a dye-free option, that we have a dye-free option. And I do agree with you that having some sort of label on all of our food so that people can be informed of what they're buying. And if you read that label and you're like, "Meh, I don't care,"
Yeah,
great.
go
Put
for
it
it.
in your buggy, check out, go home, enjoy your Tricks. But if you are someone who hasn't been privy to this conversation, or you don't have anybody in your life who is talking about this kind of stuff, or you are that mom who is barely keeping her head above water and dyes just cannot be another thing that you take on, and you pick that product up and you realize, this may not be the best choice for my family. Let me see what else is on this shelf that I could make a
No.
better choice for my family. And it sounds like even save a little bit of money because they're
Yep.
off brands. I would love that for our American families. You
Well,
guys, my next question is kind of a nefarious one. What
Ooh.
is the worst dye out there? You keep dropping like colors and numbers. Is there like a super overarching evil dye that we should
Hmm.
all be like,
well,
absolutely no?
the most people are gonna say that Red 40 is like the worst, and it very well, like Red 40 gets painted in a bad way, which I mean
It deserves
it
it.
deserves it. But
Okay.
I think the main reason that Red 40 is such an issue is because it is the number one used synthetic dye.
Yeah, it's the
So
most
Red
pervasive.
40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6 they seem to be the ones that are the biggest issue, but they're also the ones that are used the most. So when it comes to synthetic dyes in the United States, there technically are 9 dyes that are approved. Technically, Red 3 is going to be banned, so it's 8 now. So aside from Red 3, you have Red 40, Yellow 5, Yellow 6, Blue 1, Blue 2, Green 3, which those are all the ones that are typically used the most. Like Red 40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6 are the most, but then you have your blues and Green 3. Green 3 is mostly used in medication and things like that, mouthwashes. But then you also have Orange B and Citrus Red 2. Now, Orange B and Citrus Red 2, those are the two that the FDA at that same announcement announced they were going to be very quickly banning 2 synthetic dyes right off the bat, and those are Orange B and Citrus Red 2. Citrus Red 2, the only purpose for it was to color the peel of Florida oranges, And
But it hasn't been used in decades, so don't freak
well,
out. You can still,
no,
or for a long time.
Citrus Red 2 hasn't been used in years.
Yeah.
And then Orange B, the only purpose for it was like coloring like sausage casings. And it hasn't been used in decades. So like Orange B has not been used in decades because of carcinogenic concerns, but it never actually got banned. So both of those two dyes, the Orange B and Citrus Red 2, have not been in our food supply for years. You can every batch of synthetic dyes has to send in a sample to the FDA to be batch certified to make sure that it has the allowable amount of like heavy metals and carcinogens and things like that. So, but you can look at the records, and neither one of those dyes have actually been batch certified in years. So they're not actively in the food supply, and so banning them is like a no-brainer. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of pushback because they're not actually being used. So the ones that are being used are those 7, mainly the Red 40, Yellow 5, Yellow 6, Blue 1, Blue 2, Green 3.
I would say, they're all bad, obviously. But I would say Yellow 5 and Red 3 are the most concerning for me, just because we know that they can contain carcinogenic components, and then we know that they can be genotoxic, which means it can damage your DNA, which can cause a slew of issues. It can cause tumors or cancer, and then it can also, and I didn't even know this until we filmed the documentary, but you can have damaged DNA that you can pass to your child, or your child can consume something and pass on their damaged DNA to their child. So that's obviously an issue. Like we definitely don't need to be consuming something that can damage DNA. So I am worrisome about those. But I mean, all of them, they are made similarly. You know,
well, and the truth is, like, none of the studies are really like they're not.
None of them. Most
of them are not laser focusing on an individual dye. They're focusing on mixes because I mean, studies are expensive. They cost a lot of money, and the government's not funding these studies. So like.
Well, the EU, that was a government-funded study, but
even,
here in the US,
even the EU was still a mix. It was still a mix. It wasn't a specific dye. So it's like it's really hard to nail down this dye causes this, dye causes this. I mean, I guess if you wanted to, and if somebody had the money and the funding to do that, they could do that. But there's already enough.
And there are some smaller studies that have done that. But I mean, when you look at a study, we have 9. We did have 9 dyes, and if you were to break all of them down, like. Studies cost millions of dollars, not just 1 million, like millions of dollars to do a study with, 2, 3, 400 people. Like a double-blind, placebo-controlled study is very expensive, and you want a good study so that you will obviously not be dismissed in the scientific community. And so it just makes sense. Most dyes are together. If you eat a box of cereal, the dyes are mixed. If you eat a box of candy or a bag of candy, it's oftentimes mixed. So it does make sense, but that was a long answer too. We have all long answers.
I think Red 40 is what most people are going to say.
They're all bad.
There's lots of people, even in our group, who they avoid Red 40. That's the only dye that they avoid. And I think that's just because, like I said, I think it's the most used. It's been painted as the bad guy for a long time, but I don't necessarily know that. I mean, even Lisa is our like go-to person for all this sort of stuff. Lisa Lefferts from our documentary. And it was really important to her to not like paint Red 40 as like the worst one out there, because it's just the most used one out there. I don't know that it's necessarily the worst. Like none of them are good. And so yeah, long answer to one question.
No, that's super helpful. Okay, and then can you help us know what the number in each of those mean? Is that
who knows?
version,
So
or do you not know?
That's just
I don't know.
That's our labeling system. So
in the US, that's our
in the
labeling
US
system.
that's how the FDA requires it to be labeled. So if something is manufactured in the US, or if it's
But I mean, what happened to the other reds? Red 1, 2.
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
Well, yeah, Red 2. There was a Red 2 that was banned in the 70s or 60s or 70s. Red 2 was banned because of
So a lot of dyes have already been banned, in the past. Yeah. So like, there's always been concerns about their safety.
But it's just our number system. So like, I think it's either Yellow 5 or is it Yellow 5 that's tartrazine?
In like Canada.
So like tartrazine is like the common name, or Allura Red is like the common name of Red 40. And then you also have like chemical names, which like I can't remember like what all the chemical names are. But so like for whatever reason, the United States, our number system and our labeling system requires you to list it. It has to have the color and the number. So like it has to have,
and it won't be hidden on the label.
It has to have Red 40 or FD&C Red 40. And a lot of people are like, what does FD&C mean? That means food, drugs,
fudge.
and cosmetic.
It does not mean fudge.
Food, drugs, and cosmetic. Like sometimes you'll see like a D&C color, and that's just for drugs and cosmetics. So like if it's FD&C, it's approved for food, drugs, and cosmetic, and then it has to have either that color and that number. So you might see red 40, FD&C red 40, red number 40, red 40 lake. So they're
Oh,
like,
and you'll see different dyes in medications. There's a lot more dyes approved for medication and cosmetics. So, like eyeshadows and things like that will have a lot of dyes in it that aren't necessarily even like the ones that are approved for use in food.
yeah,
But you can find them. They're hard to find. You can find like naturally pigmented like cosmetics.
so yeah.
That's insane. I mean, it just feels like such a headache. It
It is a
really does.
headache.
It feels like, no matter what you do, you have to be reading labels, which we talk about so much in this community. So we're not new to the idea, but I do want to recognize anyone out there that's listening that's like, hee hee. Not another thing. I know. I
Yeah.
hate it, you guys. I'm sorry. I really am. But here's the thing. If we're going to take control of our health, we have to be doing these things because no one's going to do it for us, right? That's kind of the whole idea is like, I do hate to put more on your plate, and I do hate to say that we have to be reading even more labels. We're reading labels for our menstrual care products. We're reading labels for this. We're reading labels for our food. We're reading labels for our skincare products. And this is just another thing that once you kind of learn it, I think it'll become second nature. You can easily scan the label and you will be able to kind of find what is a problematic and what is not. So you guys, one of my last question is there a resource that we could go and learn the alternative names for these dyes so that we can kind of get into this repetition loop of just scanning over labels and
Hmm.
being able to easily identify them?
So the easiest way to do it is to remember that here in the US, it will be a color and a number, or it'll be FD&C Red 40. Like that's what you're going to look at. I would go to the bottom of the ingredients list. It's normally, listed at the bottom because it's a very small amount of synthetic dyes, and then work your way up. You probably heard rumors of they're changing the names and whatnot, but that from as far as we know on the FDA's website, they still legally have to be called, still legally have to use a number system. Where you will see it creep in is like Canada uses Allura Red and Tartrazine, and they use a different names. In the EU, you might find a product, or if they're not in the EU, like London is no longer in the EU, you could find a product that has like an American manufacturer and it has E numbers, but you won't see like the Red 40, so you think it's dye free, but they use a different labeling system. So thank goodness we don't live in London because it would be very difficult to memorize. Like their number system is very tricky. So you can do it. And on our website, you can go to dieforthedocumentary.com/resources. And I have free resources. Like I have a list of dyes, and then I have a lot of the products that we mentioned that are places that are you wouldn't expect to find dyes. I have a list of those, and then some dye-free brands. I have dye-free like Amazon lists and dye-free Christmas lists, and so we do have a lot of resources on our website completely for free. So you can go there, and I really think, and I feel a lot of people being stressed because that's how I felt too. But really, unless your child is really, really struggling and you're desperate, like we were desperate to help our child, so we removed everything, and we were totally okay. We saved money in therapy and saved money in all the things we were doing before by, just switching over our products. But if it is overwhelming to you, just take one product when you finish that product and then just find a swap and then just
Mhm.
slowly do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. You are making a good decision for your family and you should feel really proud of that.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time. It's like baby steps will get you the miles that you are trying to go. And as long as you are doing better now that you know better, that's all you can ask. And that right there shows how much you love your children. It doesn't have to be an overnight swap. And to be honest, when you try and do an overnight swap, it almost always fails because
You're
it's
right.
too
Yeah.
big. You're taking on too much. You're doing too much too fast. So just make it incremental and you're much more likely to stick with it. Okay, you guys, my final question is circling back to something that you mentioned in the beginning. And I think I want to end here because I think there are so many people who will leave this conversation and think, is this my family? Is this my child? And their first step is going to go to their pediatrician. I would love to know what the traditional healthcare system and your pediatrician offered as solutions to you that threw up red flags in your head that you were like, that's not it, that other parents should not necessarily disregard. I'm not saying discount what your providers are saying. I'm just saying that if they offer something and it doesn't work, you might want to check out food dyes instead.
For sure. Well, the reality is, if you were to look at your diet and eliminate dyes, you are only going to swap for products that are a little bit cleaner. It's just a good option anyway. If you want to do it, you don't necessarily have to talk to your doctor about, I mean, you should talk to your doctor about dietary changes. I guess we should cover our bases, but I mean, it's something that you can do over time, and it would just be a good option. But it was our experience. We went to the doctor and we consulted doctors, and none of them brought up dietary changes. And on the contrary, we had several referrals to a children's hospital to get them evaluated and to find a diagnosis so that we could do further testing and further like therapy visits that would be covered under insurance. And so the reason why that didn't feel good to us is because it like in my mama heart, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like he fit any of those
And he was
boxes.
only 3.
And he was only 3, so we did have time. And then on top of that, like he had those days that were really good, and it didn't feel like you could turn off some of the issues or some of the diagnoses that we would be looking at. And so I would say one of the most freeing conversations I've ever had was with a friend, and it was after our mother's morning out. I was crying in the parking lot. We had another day where he like bit someone, and it was just coming to the end at that daycare. We were eventually asked to leave. And they at that school, they had told me that we were no longer welcome unless we were to go through the RTI system with the school system and have the therapist come and get a diagnosis so that they could pay somebody and it would be covered under like their funding. And so that, I mean, that makes sense as a teacher with funding. They had an extra teacher on him. I get that. But it didn't feel right to give him a diagnosis at 3. I knew in my mama heart, and especially with the doctors, I told them, I was like, we're not ready for that. I don't feel like that's where we're at yet because some of these things are normal and some of these things can work out at that time. And I felt like there was something there. Like I just felt like that. And I was talking to my mama friend, and she has a child with autism. And, she did explain once you have a diagnosis, it does allow you to get the treatment your child needs if they do need extra help. But she contrasted that with, but if your mama heart says that that's not right, God made you his mama for a reason. And there's a reason why you feel like that. And just immediately tears everywhere. And I'm like, okay, I needed that. I needed the permission to do what I knew was best for my child. And then to look back and know I was right. Like God gave me that permission and gave me that child because he knew he was going to guide me through it. So if you are not trusting that, of course, trust your doctors, but to an extent, if you feel like it could be something as easy as a dietary change, like do it. There are a lot of issues with our food system, and a lot of the issues in the US, even aside from dyes, can be helped or mitigated with synthetic dyes. And even the researchers we spoke to said everybody is on a spectrum, and dyes can, take children that would be close to the gifted spectrum and take them back because they were no longer being identified as gifted because they have so many issues and they're so distracted and they're not focused. It could also be the same, like children could be close to this ADHD line and you're sending them over the edge with external factors. And so if your mama heart says it's not right and says that you need to look at diet, then I would say do it, and you have every right and freedom to feed your child the way you want to. And then I would also say that the doctors that gave us referrals, we are continuing to go to those doctors and we're talking to them, and they're very open to and not all of them, I've had one that wasn't, but most of them have been open and excited to hear. And a lot of them are now kind of changing their rhetoric. And so I do think that no one goes into wanting to be a doctor to be this evil, vindictive person. I believe that people go into healthcare to help people, but I would say listen to your gut, and God made you that mama for a reason, or dad for a reason, and to trust that.
Well, and doctors know what they have learned, right? So if you look at our doctors, our healthcare system, like nutrition and stuff like that, for the majority of doctors, isn't something that's taught a whole lot. So like they're not keeping up with like the the studies on synthetic dyes and things like that. They're reading medical journals and things like that. But like even then, they're not like, I don't, maybe they're probably not spending all their time trying to just constantly refresh themselves. They know what they've learned in school. They know how to use the resources that they have to identify things based off of your symptoms and things like that. Doctors don't know everything. You know what I mean? That like, and like Whitney said, luckily our doctors have been receptive and they've been open to learning about it, and they've asked Whitney to send them resources and things like that. So like if you have a doctor who like acts like they do know everything, it might not be the best doctor. Like I think your child and your choice. We live in America, so therefore you have the choice to go to a doctor or not go to a doctor. And I think you need to have a doctor that you're comfortable with and that you feel comfortable with. If you are constantly feeling pushed into a direction that you're not comfortable with because your doctor is telling you, like, it might not be the right doctor for you. You know what I mean? But like I said, we're not anti-doctor. Doctors are great, and like for the most part, our doctor has been receptive. But I think maybe here in the future, this will be something that more doctors are aware of.
And a lot of young doctors. We've had a lot of young doctors bring this up, and we even had a doctor at one of our showings like brought up the issue of some even like injectables, like shots, can be colored and have dyes. And so I do think there are doctors that are looking at it. You just got to find the right one.
That collaborative care is everything. And look, we around here are no strangers to admitting the downfalls and the gaps in the healthcare system. I mean, it's why we're all here, right? Is that we're all gathered here to try and have a informed and confident and healthy birth, and a healthy birth that we love, that makes us feel empowered. And I think that feeling of wanting to be in control of the choices in your life extends way beyond pregnancy and birth. And that's why I wanted to have you guys on the show. So this has been so enlightening. I really appreciate you both. I love everything that you have presented. I really appreciate you fighting the good fight. I appreciate you standing up to the people who are naysayers and don't understand necessarily why some of us care so deeply about this. And, that's okay. It's all right if people don't get you. One of the most freeing things that you can ever do in life is give other people permission to misunderstand you and just let them do what they want to do. But you know that you're doing the right thing. And I'm here to tell you that you guys are making such a big impact in our country. And I, for one, am really, really grateful. You were really, a lot of people had asked to have you on the show. And so I just want to thank you for coming on here. So if people wanted to connect with you, if they want to see your documentary, if they wanted to check out your resources, we will link all of this in the show notes, but where can they do that for you guys?
So yeah, like we do a lot of podcasts, and like we realize here that like we talk a lot about dyes, but we don't talk a whole lot about the documentary. So yes, we want you to watch the documentary. The documentary is great. It's a great resource. It's
called To Die For the documentary.
It's called To Die For, to DYE for the documentary. And you can visit our website, todieforthedocumentary.com/watch. That'll show you all the platforms that it's available on. If you just want to pull it up on your TV and watch it, it's on Amazon Prime, it's on Apple TV, Google Play, or Fandango at home. Luckily now it's if your library happens to be involved in Canopy, you can watch it for free through the Canopy system. I think there's DVD copies available,
and you can request for your library to purchase it too. Yeah.
Nice.
So I think it's in over 250 something libraries across the country. So we have lots of people watching it that way. And so yeah, we want you to watch the film. We think it's a great resource, especially if this is like, if this conversation is like, oh man, I didn't know this was a thing. It's a great tool to like give you the baseline and even and much further beyond. But like it's really digestible and really easy to like grasp and understand why dyes are an issue. We have multiple families in the documentary who have been severely impacted by synthetic dyes, and then had life-changing occurrences happen when they removed it. So it's a great resource, and it's a great way to help somebody if they don't understand why you're living a dye-free lifestyle.
Send it to grandma.
It's a great way to send it to a family member or a friend, or it's sometimes you don't want to step on toes and be like, your kid might be sensitive to dyes, you should watch the documentary. But it is a tool. That's all we made it, is a tool to help people figure out their next step on this journey.
Well, and we also have a new tool. We just finished our children's book, and I'm really excited about it because a lot of families, a lot of parents were talking about, the documentary is really, I mean, some children watch it, but it's really for the parents. And how do I explain this to my kids? And in a way that's not scary. You don't want them to be fearful or create, fear around food, but you want them to be empowered to read labels and be aware of what's in their food, and just to start that at an early age. And I know our children were able to do that in kindergarten. We're able to look at labels and to find it. And it's obviously a work in progress. But so our book is called The Case of the Color Fakes, and it's probably going to be out by the time this documentary, or not this documentary, by the time this podcast comes out. But it's like a detective's children's book. And so we teach children how to read ingredients and the foods that will never have synthetic dyes, like whole foods, fruits and vegetables. And then we go through case by case and try to find the synthetic dye. And it's just a very easy, not scary way to teach your child about dyes and to empower them to read labels. And then even at the end, we have like a parent's guide where you can,
a certificate.
In a certificate where you can, really put this into practice. So this has really been born out of like a need for families. And it's a book that I wish I had whenever our son was 3 and 4. And so here it is.
And you can go to our website to pick that up. It'll be on Amazon, but we'll have a link to it on our website. So just go to dieforthedocumentary.com. And
we have a ton of free resources on our page.
And we plan to have a little pop-up that'll either give you a link, like a click where you can click it to watch the documentary, or a link to buy the book. So.
And what is your Instagram handle?
To Die for the Documentary. So just all one word, to Die for the Documentary.
Yeah,
Dye
and we're on
D-Y-E.
Facebook, and then our group, if you're interested in that, it's called Dye Free Family, Swaps, Recipes, and Resources. So anybody can join that. It's been very, very helpful if you need a specific swap.
That's amazing. You guys, this was such a good episode. Thank you so much for being here. And listeners, I know that you are leaving this episode probably with a lot of big feels. And I just want to give you a hug and say, like, do what you will with it. If you never want to think about this again, that's totally your prerogative. If you want to start making tiny swaps in your home, I think that's a really awesome place to start. If you've already started on this journey and now you're feeling super jazzed up like I am, come hang out with us every single week, 2 times a week, and we will continue these conversations. You guys check out that documentary. Follow Whitney and Brandon on social media, and I will find you on the next episode. You can find me on Instagram at Tranquility by Hee and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm Hee, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.